A con man walked onto my stage in a suit that cost more than most hardworking folks make in a month. And he sat down across from me and he spent the next 10 minutes lying straight to my face on live television. And I want you to know something right now. Before we go 1 inch further, I let him. I sat right there in my chair and I nodded and I smiled and I leaned in like I was impressed. And I let that man tell every single lie he came to tell because I already knew exactly who he was. I already knew exactly what he had done and who he had done it to. And I wanted him to say all of it, every word out loud in front of the whole world before I ever let on that I knew a single thing. This is the story of the day I played the fool on purpose. The day I sat there and let the smoothest, slickest liar I have ever met in my life think he was running circles around me because that was the whole plan. And by the time it was over, that man, that smooth-talking, silver-tongued man who had never in his life been at a loss for words, could not get one single word out of his mouth. Not one. So stay with me, because there is a particular kind of justice in letting a wolf walk all the way into the room before you turn the lights on. And I have never seen it land the way it landed that day. And real quick, before we get into it, if you or anybody you love has ever been taken advantage of at the lowest moment of your life, if somebody ever smiled at you and shook your hand and then robbed you blind while you were down, then do me a favor and tap that subscribe button right now. Do it for every good, trusting soul who reached for a helping hand in the dark and got a knife instead. Now let me tell you how we caught him. To understand this story, you have to meet Margaret first, because Margaret is the reason any of it happened, and I need you to know her before you meet the man who hurt her. Her name was Margaret Ellison, Marge. And when I first learned about Marge, it was not because she came looking for help for herself. I want you to hold on to that because it tells you everything about who she is. Marge was 63 years old, and 8 months before she ever crossed my mind, she had lost her husband. His name was Frank. And Frank and Marge had been married for 41 years. 41 years. You know what that is? That's a whole life. That's raising the kids and burying the parents and paying off the little house and sitting on the porch in the evening, not even needing to talk because you already know what the other one's thinking. 41 years. And then Frank got sick, the bad kind of sick, and after a hard year fighting it, he was gone. And Marge was alone in that quiet little house for the first time in 4 decades. Now here's where Frank left her. Frank was not a rich man. Frank worked and he saved the slow, careful way that regular people save, a little bit out of every check for 41 years. And by the time he passed, Frank had put away right around $190,000. That was it. That was the whole of it. 41 years of a working man's discipline, $190,000. And it was going to be the thing that let Marge live out her days without being a burden on anybody and without being afraid. That money was not just money. I need you to understand that. That money was Frank still taking care of her even after he was gone. That was his last act of love, sitting in a bank account. That was 41 years of him saying, "I've got you, baby," even now. And a man named Ray Delacroix took almost every penny of it. Here is how it happened. And I want you to listen close, because this could be your mother. This could be your grandmother. This could be you someday, God forbid. About 2 months after Frank passed, when Marge was still in that thick fog of grief where you can barely remember to eat, a man showed up. Warm, well-dressed, kind eyes, firm handshake, the whole packet. He came recommended or seen to through a chain of people that looked legitimate enough. And he sat down with Marge at her kitchen table, and he was so gentle with her. He talked about Frank like he cared. He said all the right things. And then, so softly, so reasonably, he said he wanted to help her protect Frank's legacy. That's the word he used, legacy. He said a woman in her situation shouldn't have to worry her head about money during such a difficult time, that he would manage it all for her, keep it safe, keep it growing. So Frank's hard work would take care of her just like Frank wanted. And Marge, who was drowning, who could not think straight, who wanted more than anything in the world for someone to just take one heavy thing off her shoulders, said yes. And within 4 months, the money was gone. It didn't happen all at once. That's how they do it. It was a fee here, and a reallocation there, and a temporary downturn, and some paperwork she didn't understand, but signed because he was so nice and so patient. And every time she got a statement that scared her, he had a warm, confident explanation ready. Until one day she looked, and 41 years of Frank was down to almost nothing. $190,000 gone. And she couldn't even tell you exactly how, because every single step had a reasonable sounding reason attached to it. And when she finally got scared enough to really push him to demand answers, that warm, kind man got slippery, and then he got cold. And then he stopped answering her calls altogether. And Marge was left sitting alone in that quiet house, 63 years old, grieving her husband and now grieving his life's work on top of it, and believing in her heart that it was all her own fault. That's the part that I cannot stand. Because Marge spent those months believing she was a fool. She thought she'd been stupid. She was ashamed. So ashamed she almost didn't tell anybody at all. Now I need to teach you something right here, because it is the single most important thing in this whole story. These people, men like Ray Delacroix, they do not hunt the foolish. Get that idea out of your head right now. They hunt the grieving. You understand me? They read the obituaries. That is a real thing that they really do. They read the death notices and they find the widows and the widowers, and they show up 2 months later with a warm smile because they know that a person who has just lost the love of their life after 41 years is not thinking clearly. They know that grief knocks down every wall you've got. They know that a kind word in that moment can walk right past a lifetime of good sense. Marge was not stupid. Marge was heartbroken, and that man knew the difference, and he used it like a tool. That is not taking advantage of a foolish woman. That is a predator who studied exactly where the fence was weakest and walked right through it. So now you know Marge, and you know what was done to her. Here is how she ended up connected to me. And this is the part that made me love that woman before I ever met her. Marge did not write to my show asking for her money back. She did not write asking me to fix her life. When my team first got her letter, we braced for a plea for help because that's most of what we get, and there's no shame in it. But that's not what Marge wrote. Marge wrote because she wanted to warn people. She said in her letter that she knew her money was probably gone for good, and she made a kind of peace with that. But she could not stop thinking about the next woman, the next widow, sitting at her own kitchen table in her own fog of grief, about to say yes to the same warm smile. And Marge said, if telling my embarrassing story on television could stop that from happening to even one other person, then she'd swallow her shame and tell it. That's why she wrote. Not for herself. For a stranger she'd never meet. That's the woman we're talking about here. So my team started looking into Mr. Ray Delacroix, and what we found made my blood run cold, because Marge was not the first. Marge was not even close to the first. There was a pattern. This man had a trail behind him, moving from place to place, and it was littered with grieving people who'd handed him their dead spouse's life savings and got robbed for their trouble. Different names, different cities, same exact playbook every single time. The obituary, the warm handshake, the word legacy, the slow drain, the cold silence at the end. Now, I could have just done the story. I could have put Marge on, let her tell her warning, put up a big graphic that said, watch out for men like this, and that would have been a fine show, and it would have helped some people, and I'd have felt okay about it. But I didn't want to do a fine show. I wanted that man to answer for it. And more than that, I wanted every person watching to see with their own eyes exactly how one of these wolves operates, so they never ever fall for it. And you can't do that by talking about him. You got to let people watch him work. So I made a decision. And I want to be honest, it was a little bit devious, and I'd do it again 100 times over. I had my team reach out to Ray Delacroix, and we did not say one word about Marge. We told him that we wanted to feature him on the show as one of the top up-and-coming wealth advisors in the whole country. A real flattering piece, a spotlight on his success. And oh, that man could not say yes fast enough. He didn't ask a single hard question, didn't hesitate, because you have to understand how a man like that thinks. His entire life, his whole operation is built on one thing and one thing only, looking legitimate. That's the product. That's the whole con. And here I was, offering to put him on national television and hand him legitimacy for free, gift wrapped. In his mind, he just won the lottery. In his mind, he was using me. He thought he was going to walk onto the Steve Harvey stage and get a national commercial for his little robbery operation. Let him think it. That was the plan. You want to catch a man who's always using people? Let him think he's using you. So the day came, and Ray Delacroix walked onto my stage. And I have to tell you, he was good. He really was. I have met a lot of smooth people in my life, and this man was among the smoothest. The suit was perfect. The handshake was warm and firm, and it lasted exactly the right amount of time. The smile reached his eyes, which is the hardest thing to fake, and he mastered. He sat down across from me like he owned the chair, comfortable, gracious, humble in that practiced way that isn't humble at all. And I turned it on. I played my part. I want you to picture this, because if you tuned in without knowing, you would have sworn old Steve was getting charmed right out of his socks. I told him how impressed I was. I told him I'd heard great things. I got him relaxed, got him comfortable, got him feeling like he was among friends and everything was going exactly the way he'd hoped. And then, real casual, I said, Ray, do me a favor. There's a lot of folks watching at home right now who don't know the first thing about this world. Explain to them what you do. Walk us through your method. And that right there was the hook. Because if there's one thing a man like Ray Delacour cannot resist, it is being asked to talk about how brilliant he is. And he went. Lord, did he go? He leaned back and he got that look on his face. The look of a man settling in to admire himself. And he laid the whole thing out. And he used all his pretty words. He talked about legacy protection. He talked about grief-sensitive planning. Grief-sensitive. He said that with a straight face, proud of it, like it was a service and not a hunting strategy. And I just kept nodding, kept smiling, kept feeding him more rope. I said, now that's fascinating, Ray. So who's your typical client? Who do you help the most? And he said it on camera. He said, well, Steve, I really specialize in working with recently widowed clients, people who just lost a spouse and are feeling overwhelmed. And I said, and what's the key to helping folks like that? And he said, trust, Steve. It's all about trust, especially in those first few months. That's when they need someone to just take the burden off their hands completely. Those first few months, I want you to understand what was happening in that moment. That man was sitting on my stage, smiling into the cameras, and he was confessing. He was describing in flattering language the exact way he hunts. He was telling the whole world that he targets people in the first few months after they lose their husband or wife, when they're too overwhelmed to think, and that he gets them to hand over everything completely. He was narrating his own crime, and he thought he was giving a masterclass. He thought he was impressing people. And here is the thing I learned that day that I want to hand to you, because it's worth more than money. If you ever want a guilty man to tell you the truth, do not corner him. A cornered man goes quiet. A cornered man lawyers up and shuts his mouth. But a flattered man will tell you every single thing. Pride is the loosest lips there are. I didn't interrogate Ray Delacour. I complimented him. And he handed me the whole confession with a bow on top, because I made him feel like the smartest man in the room. I let him go on like that for a good while. Let him really get comfortable. Let him say enough that there could be no mistaking any of it. And then I said, Ray, this has been great, but I've got a little surprise for you. And his face lit up, because in his world, surprises on television are good things. Surprises are awards and testimonials and praise. I said, we reached out to one of your clients, someone who could speak to your work firsthand. And she's here today, and you could see him just glowing, get ready to receive his glowing review. He straightened his tie. He put on his best warm face, ready to greet a happy customer. And then Margaret Ellison walked out onto my stage. And I was watching his face. I was watching it real close because I did not want to miss it. And I caught it. For about half of 1 second, before he could stop it, the mask slipped. The blood went out of his face. His eyes went wide. Pure animal panic, there and gone in a flash. Because it's two worlds, the one where he robs grieving widows and the one where he plays the respectable advisor on television. Those two worlds were never, ever supposed to be in the same room. But he was good. I'll give him that. He slammed the mask back on quick. He shot up out of his chair, all warm, arms open, and he said, Margaret, oh, it's so wonderful to see you. Performing for the cameras, trying to grab control of the moment, trying to turn it into the reunion he needed it to be. But Marge did not play along. Marge had been ready for this. We had talked. She'd been terrified, and she'd been brave anyway, which is the only kind of brave there is. She did not fall into his arms. She did not smile. She just walked to the empty chair, and she sat down, calm as still water, and she looked at that man, and she asked him a simple question. She said, where's Frank's money, Ray? And you should have seen it. On the phone, over those months, he'd had 100 slippery answers for her. Market condition, reallocation, temporary downturn. But there's nowhere to be slippery when you are sitting on a stage under the lights with a camera on your face and a whole audience holding its breath. All those slick explanations need shadows to work in, and I've taken away the shadow. He stammered. The first crack. He said, Margaret, these things are complicated. The market has been. And she said, 41 years, Ray. Frank saved for 41 years. Where is it? And he turned to me. That's what they do. When they start to lose control, they look for an ally, for higher ground. He turned to me with a little laugh, that let's be reasonable laugh, expecting me, his host, his partner in this flattering little feature, to help him smooth it all over. And that is the moment I took the mask off. Mine, this time. I didn't yell. I want you to know that. I have learned that the quietest voice in the room is very often the most powerful one. I just looked at him, calm, and I said, Ray, stop. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. And something in my voice made him go still. I said, you didn't get invited onto my show today. You got invited into a room. You understand the difference. Margaret didn't come to you today, Ray. She came to me 8 months ago. And everything that's happened in the last 10 minutes, all of it, the compliments, the flattering questions, me asking you to explain your method, asking you who you specialize in, asking you about those first few months, every bit of it was for one single reason, so that you would sit here and say it yourself, out loud, on camera, in your own words, before you ever had the faintest idea that we knew exactly who you are. And I watched it land. I watched that man understand in real time that the flattering feature had been bait, that the lottery ticket he thought he won was a trap with his name on it, that for once in his whole life of using people, he had been the one being used. He was the mark. He'd walked in here so sure he was working me, and the whole time he was the fish, and I've been reeling him in slow so he wouldn't feel the hook till it was too late. But I still wasn't done, because I had one more thing. And this was the thing that finished. This was the thing that took every last word out of that man's mouth for good. I stood up and I turned to my audience and I said, I want to ask something, and I want to ask it gently because I know this is hard. If there's anyone here today who has also lost money to a man who came to you after you lost your husband or your wife, a man who smiled and promised to protect your family's legacy and then took it instead, would you please, if you're able, stand up? And the studio was quiet. And then, in the back, a woman stood up, older, silver hair, standing there with her chin up even though her hands were shaking. And then off to the side, an elderly couple stood up together, holding on to each other. And then another woman. And then a man near the front, must have been 75 years old, pushed himself up out of his seat on a cane. Not a huge crowd. I'm not going to lie to you and say 100 people stood up. It was maybe 6, maybe 7, but that is 6 or 7 whole human lives, 6 or 7 grieving people that this one man had robbed at the lowest moment of their existence. My team had found him quietly, the same way we found Marge. And we had invited every one of them and sat them out there in that audience. And not one of them knew about the others until that very moment. And Ray Delacroix stood in the middle of my stage, and he turned slow, and he looked around that room at all of them, standing up one by one. All these people he thought he left behind in different cities. All these ghosts he was sure would never find each other, standing up all at once and looking right at him. And the smoothest talker I have ever met in my entire life could not produce one single word. Not one. His mouth opened and nothing came out. He had a lie ready for me, sure. He had a lie for the cameras and a lie for Marge. He had a lie for every single person one at a time. But there's no lie big enough. There's no charm smooth enough to cover a whole room full of the people you have robbed, standing up together in silence, looking you dead in the eye. For the first time in his slick, practiced, predatory life, that man ran completely out of words. And the silence where his words used to be was the loudest thing in that whole building. Now, some of you right about now are waiting for a certain part of this story. You're waiting for me to tell you the sad reason. The part where I explained that Ray was desperate or broken or hurting somewhere deep down, that some old wound made him this way. Because I've told you stories like that before, and they were true when I told them. Sometimes the person who does wrong is really just a broken soul who lost their way, and they deserve your understanding. I am not going to do that here, and I want to tell you why, because it matters. I looked. I want you to know that I looked. Before that show, and during it, I looked hard for the wounded man hiding inside Ray Delacroix. I looked for the sad story, the hard childhood, the desperate circumstance, anything that would let me hand you a little bit of sympathy to soften all this. It wasn't there. Because here is a truth about this world that I have had to make my peace with. Some people do wrong because life broke them, and they need our compassion. And some people do wrong simply because it is easier than working, and because somewhere along the line, they decided that other people's pain is not their problem, it's their opportunity. That's it. No tragedy, no wound. Just a choice made over and over to feed on the grief of others because it paid well and the marks were too heartbroken to fight back. Ray Delacroix was the second kind, and I was not about to stand on my stage and insult Margaret Ellison and that whole room of people he robbed by inventing a sad little backstory to make his crimes go down easier. Some people don't need your understanding. They need to be stopped. He was one of them. But I tell you what, I did not want to spend one more second of that show on him than I had to, because he was never the point. He was the least important person in that entire building, and giving him too much of my attention would have been its own kind of insult to the people who actually mattered. So let's leave him standing there speechless where he belongs, and let me tell you about the part that I actually cared about. Because the thing I wanted most out of that whole day was not to catch Ray Delacroix. Catching him was good. The evidence he'd handed us, describing his own method on camera, that set some very real things in motion. Legal things, the kind of things that don't happen fast on television but do happen, especially when there's 7 victims instead of 1, and a recording of the man explaining exactly how he did it. But that's not what I cared about most. What I cared about most was getting to say something to Margaret, because that woman had spent 8 long months believing she was a fool. 8 months of shame sitting on top of her grief, telling herself she was stupid, that she should have known, that she'd let Frank down. And I gotta look her in the eye in front of the whole world, and I gotta hand that shame back to its rightful owner. I said, Marge, I want to tell you something, and I want everybody watching who's ever been in your shoes to hear it too. You are not a fool. You never were. You loved the man for 41 years, and when he was gone, you trusted the world to be as decent as you are. That's not stupidity, Marge. That is just about the most beautiful thing a human being can be. The shame you've been carrying was never yours. Not for one day, it belonged to him. And I pointed at Ray standing there mute. And today, in front of God and everybody, we are handing it back. And that woman wept, but it wasn't the crying she'd been doing alone in that quiet house for 8 months. It was something letting go. It was a weight she'd been dragging by herself, finally sliding off her shoulders. And then something happened that I did not plan. And it's my favorite part of the whole thing. Marge stood up, and she walked down off my stage, and she went into that audience, to those other people who had stood up, the silver-haired woman, and the elderly couple, and the man with the cane, the strangers who shared her exact wound. And she started hugging them, one by one, these people who had each been suffering all alone, each one believing they were the only fool in the world, and each one ashamed to say it out loud. And now here they were finding each other right there in my studio, realizing they were not alone, and they never had been. That woman had come to me 8 months earlier, not asking for a thing for herself. She'd come to warn strangers, and now here she was, standing in the middle of a little group of those very strangers, and her fighting back, her being brave enough to swallow her shame and speak. That's the thing that brought them all together. She didn't just help herself that day. She built something, a little circle of people who would not have to be alone anymore. Now let me tell you how it really ended, because I'm not gonna lie to you and wrap it up in a bow it doesn't deserve. Marge never got all of Frank's money back. I wish I could tell you different. These things grind through the court slow, and a man like that hides money the same way he steals it, and some of it was just gone. She got some, not all, probably never all. But here's the thing. Remember why she came to me in the first place. She didn't come for the money. She came to warn people. And that she got more than she ever dreamed. Because after that show aired, my team got flooded with messages from people all over this country who said they had been sitting at their own kitchen table in their own fog of grief, about to sign papers with a warm, well-dressed man who promised to protect their legacy. And they saw Marge. They saw her story, and they put the pen down, and they didn't sign. We would never know the exact number. You can't count the robberies that don't happen, but it was a lot. It was widows and widowers all across this land who kept their husbands and wives' life savings because one grieving woman in a quiet house was brave enough to stand up and say, "This happened to me. Don't let it happen to you." Marge lost some money she'll probably never see again, but she got the one thing she actually asked for. She turned her worst shame into a shield that protected strangers she will never meet. And when I asked her if it was worth it, she looked at me and she said, "Frank would have done the same thing. He never could stand by and watch somebody get hurt." And I thought, 41 years. Some of that man rubbed off on her permanent. That's a legacy too, the real kind. the kind no thief can ever touch. So here is what that whole day taught me, and then I'll let you go. The devil does not always show up with horns and a pitchfork. I wish he did. It'd be so much easier. Sometimes the devil shows up in a beautiful suit with a warm handshake and kind eyes and the softest voice you ever heard, right at the lowest, weakest, most broken moment of your entire life. And he calls himself a helper. He reads the obituary, and he shows up at the funeral of your good sense, and he offers to carry the very thing he plans to steal. So watch the people who show up when you're grieving. Now hear me right, because most of them are angels. Most of the people who come around when you're down are good, decent folks who just want to help, and you should let them, and you should thank God for them. But every now and then, one of them is a wolf who read the death notice. And the way you beat a wolf like that is not to outshout him, because he is always, always going to be smoother than you. The way you beat him is to smile and let him talk and let the whole wide world hear exactly what he is, straight from his own mouth. If this story moved you tonight, do 3 things for me before you go. Subscribe to this channel, because we tell the stories that protect the people who need protecting. Share this with somebody you love, especially somebody who might be grieving right now, because it might just be the thing that saves them. And go down to those comments and type the word legacy for Frank and for Marge and for every good soul out there who trusted the world to be as decent as they are. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. I'll see you in the next one. God bless you, and God bless every grieving heart out there. May the only people who find you in your sorrow be the ones who came to help you carry it.